Hello, and welcome back to LTC Heroes Live by Experience Care. My name is Peter Murphy Lewis. I'm your host. Today, I'm excited to continue the conversation about none other than sexuality and long-term care. In one of our most recent episodes, I had Dr. Jane Fleishman on to talk about her work in her great book. And today I asked her if she could introduce me to someone special in long-term care who has hired her to come in and train their staff. So Beth Cardillo is the executive director at Armbrook Village. Beth, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Beth, I will bring in our friend and teammate and educator, Dr. Jane, in a moment to talk about your all's relationship and what it was like training your staff. But I would like to start off with you. I normally ask the very first question, which is how you got into long-term care. And I will ask that, but I'm going to warn you right away. I'm going to ask you, how did your initiation story after that, how did you get into sexuality and long-term care? But let's start off with your first day in post-acute. How old were you? And did you realize you were going to be at it at this stage in life?
Oh my God. I think so. And I'm not young. So here I am still working and loving what I do and learning new things every day. So, and who doesn't like sex or who doesn't like talking about sex? So, if your question is, how did I get involved in this? How did I meet Jane? I can tell you that Jane was speaking at another assisted living facility in Northampton, Mass. And I don't know if I saw it on Facebook. I don't know what the heck I saw it on. But I said, wow, this sounds interesting. And she was going to talk to, I think it was residents, right, Jane? About sexuality and long-term care. And I thought, wow, I'd like to know more about this. These things come up in conversation. These things come up in actions. These things come up and you got to think fast about what to do. Maybe it would help if I actually knew what to do without having to kind of guess as I go along. So I went to see Jane there, and I think I dragged a couple of my staff with me, and it was after work, like at 6:30 at night or something, and there we were. And we walked in, and we were there. We were, I think, the only other professionals in the community that were there. And Jane had a great, lively discussion with residents at this community. And afterwards, I think Jane came up to me or I came up to her. And after we realized we were both New Yorkers, that automatically put us right in the right place about why I was there. And we exchanged phone numbers and we continued to talk and had this great conversation about what Jane could do for us at my community, not so much to talk to our residents, but to talk to our staff and how to handle different situations as they come up. We needed the tools.
Beth, I'm interested in how did you know what you didn't know? I don't know if every executive director approaches new topics or trying to discover new knowledge in the same way you did. Were you a little bit nervous? What were the things that you felt like, I just need more knowledge here. I don't know how I would handle a specific situation.
Yeah, it was kind of like that. I mean, I've worked at a variety of different places, and at every one of those places, something has come up sometime and you're not quite sure if you've got it right. And, what's better than education? I mean, how else are you going to learn? So I embrace change. I embrace learning. And, I got to be able to do it right. And I want to do it well. So.
Dr. Jane, in our last conversation, we talked a lot about your book, but we haven't talked so much about the evolution of your workshops. Can you take me back to that first workshop, if you remember, when you met Beth, and tell me, what you were talking about then, and then also what Beth brought you on to do?
Sure. Thanks, Peter. And Beth, so great to see you again, by the way. Peter, I met Beth that night in June 2017 when I gave this workshop for families and residents. And it was a public forum. And the people I was offering the workshop for said, just be careful. There might be some family members there who might be a little bit upset. Like this might be new to them. This might be a whole other can of worms. So when I titled the workshop, Peter, this is early on in my sexuality education work. I had just gotten my PhD. You know what I mean, Peter? I was really just getting started. I called the workshop Meeting the Emotional and Intimacy Needs of Our Residents. And I thought, that's a great title because it doesn't mention the word sex. But guess what? It was a terrible title because it didn't mention the word sex. And so when I started talking about sexuality, people, their eyes got big, like, oh, what's this? So I learned, how we all learn. We learn by making some mistakes, and we also learn by taking risks. And it was a big risk, I thought. It was my first public talk on sexuality and aging. And when Beth came over to talk to me at the end, I thought, wow, this is great. Somebody's really interested, and she runs a long-term care, assisted living community. At that point, I didn't really know the difference between assisted living and dependent living. I had heard of SNFs. I had done some work in a previous career with nursing home workers, but I really didn't know that much. And so I was thrilled that Beth was willing to take a risk on this topic and also on me because, very few gerontologists, anybody who is in the field of long-term care knows this, that you get almost no educational experience in sexuality issues. You might get a little bit around abuse. You might get a little bit around how to deal with people who are engaging in non-mutually agreed upon sex, but there's very, very little in any of the social work programs or any of the ancillary or other allied health professionals, nursing schools, PA programs, any of them on sexuality. So I thought, I have a big road here. I need to really start educating professionals. And so I was thrilled that Beth wanted to invite me to Westfield and to Armbrook, which I had never been to before. So that was exciting.
Beth, tell me about how your staff reacted. And I'm going to have a follow-up question as well, and you could take whichever one you like first. What did you learn? Do you remember? It was 5 years ago. So sometimes what you know now, it just becomes part of your bedrock and your foundation.
Oh God, that's a tough question. Let me get back to staff first, because I think Jane spoke initially to my management staff first, and we kind of plotted a course about how to talk to my staff, which were young resident care associates. And there was going to be a lot of things that go into that mix in terms of their own values, their own beliefs, their religion, and blah, blah, blah. So we kind of had long discussion about that and plotting that course. So I was very, very comfortable with that. I don't think I learned, I know that everyone has sex. I know that older people still have sex. I know, and I've been to a million workshops about years ago, sexuality in nursing homes. And there was a guy that was a social worker that was doing a lot of talking on that, but that was a whole different ballgame. That was more about legal issues. And that was, when you're in a nursing home, you've kind of given up much of your rights. We're talking assisted living is a landlord-tenant relationship. And so that's a whole different ballgame. You're talking about that people are really kind of living in a kind of a senior condo with perks and assistance if you need it. So the last time I looked, if I lived in an apartment building, I didn't have to check with the superintendent if it was okay if I had sex with the guy or a woman in the apartment next door to me. So this was a whole different can of worms, and it brought up lots of stories, and we just wanted to make sure we were getting it right. And I think for the most we were, but there were so many interesting twists and turns in this plot there, because there are so many what ifs. What if this? What if that? What happens if you're not? What happens if you're not your own guardian anymore, right? And you've given that right up. What happens if the person has dementia? And this is something I ask in training and orientation. Is it okay for two people to have sex that have dementia? Well, of course it isn't. Why isn't it? Are they both consenting? Do they both like each other? Are they kind of at the same level of dementia? Then what's changed with them? Right? So, and I've also worked for years in traumatic brain injury, again, more with the brain, and the same questions kept popping up all the time. So I think what Jane taught us was to look at it a little bit differently. And I was already a firm believer that people have rights no matter how old they are. It was just a matter of figuring out, it gets tricky. Do you talk to families? Do you have to ask them? How do you explain it to staff? I mean, those are all the things that Jane kind of worked with us around.
Beth, I would guess that participating in these workshops is fun for you. You get to listen to some cool questions. You get to see some staff that you didn't think would open up, or maybe someone's a little bit more conservative than you thought, really take the tools and run with it. Do you have any specific incidents? Obviously, you don't have to give names, but like, wow, I'm really proud of this person, or our relationship changed because now I see them differently, or they were so much more open-minded and understand that sexuality is part of aging, no matter how old we are. Any examples that you can think about your real life experience in the workshops?
Yeah, I think that when Jane met with my management staff, I was shocked about how open everybody was. I wasn't sure everybody would be as embraceful as I am, but they were, and that was wonderful. And there are people that are pretty quiet and don't say much, and I was surprised that they did open up. In terms of my young resident care associates, I was surprised how much religion came into the conversation, and about what was right and not right in their head, about, kind of like we were saying, kind of like it's okay. And they were saying it's not okay. It's not okay. And it took a lot of soul searching for a lot of these folks to kind of put their own stuff aside and think about what it's like for an 84-year-old woman who's lonely and whatever. It took work on everybody's part.
Dr. Jane, I'd like to know what, I guess the question is, the word's not tactics. What are the stages that you take staff through in these workshops in terms of getting them to open up and getting them to talk about, that this is potentially a human right, potentially there's emotional intelligence that's involved, there's obviously legal and liability issues going on. You have to think about from a marketing point of view. Beth has to also think about residents' families. Dr. Jane, can you walk me through kind of how your workshop engages these different answers in different stages?
I think of the work that I did that first couple of years as kind of level one. We were just developing awareness tools. So I was asking people to do things like have a conversation about sex, talk to somebody. And I had some tools that I used, Peter, that would open up conversations where you had to walk up to somebody and say, have you ever looked at porn? People get really nervous, like, I can't say that out loud. And I said, no, you just walk up to somebody and ask them and jot it down if they answer you. And so I had these great tools to sort of open up people's consciousness to realize that we're all nervous talking about sex, not just talking about sex with older adults, because for most of us, the older adults in our care are older than we are, and we were always taught not to talk to the older generation about sex, right? That was like taboo. But in fact, it's taboo to talk about sex with almost anyone in our culture. And so, and this, by the way, is not endemic to all societies, but in the US today, I'd say it's really taboo. And so the first challenge, if you will, that I was trying to overcome was just letting people get a little bit more comfortable talking about sex and sexuality issues. And so I would bring up the research. I'm a researcher as well as an educator, and so I wanted people to get the most up-to-date research on sexuality among older adults. And so I talked about physiological changes and psychosocial changes, and I talked about challenges, but I also talked about the joys and the potential and what I call the emergent pleasure that could be had for older adults. Because at the end of the day, for long-term care heroes and anyone involved in any kind of long-term care, we know that the work is to provide an environment that allows older adults to feel as good as possible in their older age. And so I was using the term wellness and well-being, and Beth really helped me think that through. Beth, you were a great thought partner in those early conversations, because you said, hey, we've got all sorts of wellness programs. We've got nutrition, we've got spiritual health, we've got financial health, but nobody's talking about sexual health as part of wellness. And it was really a great way for me to kind of think about it under the umbrella of wellness and well-being. And I talk about that a lot. And so now, Peter, I'm on this sort of second stage, right? The second level. Now people seem to be aware, right? Through the work that I and my colleagues, it's not just me, there's a good handful of people like myself out there doing this kind of work in senior living. Now, and especially, by the way, in the company that Armbrook is a part of, the SLR company, Senior Living Residences, is really committed to doing trainings around sexuality. So I feel like we've really gotten to a new level. And the second level is really something you touched on, Peter, and that's the human rights issues. So what are the rights for older adults who will be engaging in sexual activity, just like younger people will? And how do we both protect but also allow, right? That balance, that very delicate balance. We're always working on that sort of risk assessment, but also allowing people to have as much pleasure as possible. And so, one of the things that has been really interesting, and Beth, you brought this up a few times, is around cognitive difficulties. And in the US, we don't have very many assessment tools to decide whether somebody can really be able to offer this sexual consent for someone else. They may have been okay in the morning, but later on, maybe there's a bit of a difference. And so I've been working with a doctoral student who's now just gotten her PhD, and she is developing a tool for people in assisted living, independent living, and also nursing homes who can assess whether an individual is cognitively aware enough to offer their own sexual consent, which I think is a really exciting development. And of course, consent is a new challenge, right? Many older adults never heard the word consent. Were brought up at a time before the Me Too movement, and before we were really thinking about what it meant. And so I often, give people a whole new insight into their own sexual autonomy around their own bodies. And that's what I'm talking with residents themselves. So there's some really new, I think, exciting developments around training for both staff and residents and their families. And one last thing I want to say about families. Families sometimes can be really difficult, and families can also be really excited because they want their family members to feel good. However, they're really scared. They're scared about sexually transmitted infections. They're scared about abuse. They're scared about somebody, taking over the estate. I don't know, all those kinds of fears. And so I've been thinking a lot lately about how we begin to allay family members' fears and do it in a wellness perspective.
Beth, I guess my follow-up question for that is, what are the reactions that you've had? I'm right now based in Kansas. I'm guessing that the way that the average Kansas executive director might approach sexual education would be different than someone from Mass. And I bet even I went to college in Massachusetts. I bet someone from New York approaches it differently than someone from Massachusetts. How have the reactions been from family and staff?
I would say it's very, very individualized. And I'll give you a story. I had a married couple that were living here. They both had cognitive decline. I have to throw something out first. We've had residents that have had sex with each other and they don't even know their names. So I gotta say, and that doesn't matter, because they know they have feelings for that person. Dementia gets in the way, but that's okay. But I had a family, husband and wife. Her dementia was a little bit more involved than his, and so we had a special program during the day for some of our residents that really needed more help cognitively. It was like a separate day program within the building. And so she went to that every day. And apparently, while she was in the program, her husband had other ideas. And he made friends with another resident, and they would sit in the lobby all the time. And I guess, for better lack of words, she was always kind of trying to pick him up. And he didn't resist. So we found them a few times together, right? So how the heck do you deal with that? What do you do? Do I have to talk to him? Again, I'm like the superintendent of a building. Is it any of my business? What happens if the daughter walks in and sees her father on the floor naked with this resident that he doesn't even know the name of, and says to me, "Did you know about this?" There was just tons of questions that came up in our mind about how to handle this. And this is just one example. I suspect he always had a wandering eye, because the wife was accusing him right from day one of this and that and the other thing. So I don't think this was new in their relationship, but it certainly was new in the daughter's eyes. So I did end up talking to the daughter, because I felt like I would be in a real pickle if I didn't. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. And sometimes you just have to soul search a little bit. I don't know if Dr. Jane would have agreed with me, but I did talk to the family, and the daughter went hysterical. And she said, "I need to talk to him. Will you do it with me?" And I said, "Absolutely." So her dad comes down, and he felt like he was in the principal's office. And he said, "What did I do?" And she just went, "Daddy, what are you doing?" And blah, 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 blah. And he expressed remorse, and he said, "I don't even know her name." And again, it didn't matter whether he knew her name. They were an item. And everyone knew about it, because you'd see them in the building, being pretty close with each other. So that was a very touchy subject, no pun intended. And we had to deal with it. And I think we dealt with it okay. But believe me, I got tons of stories, and they're all kind of a variation on a theme. So I know people talk about at the villages in Florida, it's high in sexually transmitted diseases, and there's all these people in their 60s, widowed, whatever, divorced, having a great time. But let me tell you, there's a lot of people in their 80s and 85s and 90s having a great time. And we actually have quite a few couples here that were widowed that kind of got together with another resident, and now are living together. So the idea of, I think, Jane, you mentioned it before, about people thriving. That's what I see here. I see that people, who doesn't like touch? Who doesn't like intimacy? Right? And that is a part of wellness. That's a part that people shouldn't be missing in their lives. So the fact that we can feel okay about it, because listen, everything comes from the top down. If I thought this was the worst thing in the world, everybody else would have thought this was the worst thing in the world, right? So I think it had to be expressed with a lot of acceptance on my part.
Dr. Jane, I would guess that your work is very emotionally rewarding, being able to allow people to open up about topics that are taboo. Myself, having worked with the dead and dying, working with HIV population, illegal immigrants, allowing people to talk about things that are embarrassing or scary or taboo for other people is very rewarding. Can you tell me about when you're finished with the workshop, what do you go home with? What do you reflect upon? What do you share with your partner?
Yeah, John Delamater, who was one of the best sex researchers for older adults, just passed away a few years ago. He worked at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He did a big meta-analysis and found that people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s were still having sex. And that was a big revelation for a lot of people. But in my workshops, people come up to me at the end of the workshop, and I know anecdotally that people in their 90s are still having sex and still having enjoyment. And by the way, I don't just define sex as penis in vagina intercourse. Sex can be soft sex. Sex can be outer course. There's so many different, really great makeout sessions can be sex for somebody, right? I don't define it for them. I let people define it for themselves. So at the end of a workshop, very often people will come up to me and they'll ask me the best questions because they don't want everybody to hear them in the middle of the room. So they come up to me, and I always tell people, I'll hang around for another 15 minutes or so, and I'll set up a little chair over here if you want to talk to me. And I often bring sex toys and condoms and samples of lube, and that always goes really fast. And people come up to me and they'll ask me the most incredibly vulnerable and personal questions. Like one woman came up to me recently and she said, I've never had an orgasm. What is it? And she was in her 80s, right? I mean, for her to trust me after being in a workshop with me, and we sat down together and we talked, and I explained a little bit of human sexual physiology, right? And it was great. It was so happy, but I couldn't explain it to her. And I brought up my vulva puppet, and we looked at the clitoris, and we looked at the outer lips and the inner lips, and we talked about it. It was just so exciting. She was really kind of, she had a real smile on her face at the end. It was great. I go home and I feel really good. I feel really charged. This is my second career, folks. I didn't start out doing this. I had a very serious career before this. I was working in a psych hospital as a director of medical and staff education, and I was going home with a lot of headaches. I had a lot of migraines in those days. I don't get migraines anymore. I feel really good about my work, and I'm on a mission to promote sexual wellness for older adults. And I'm going to keep doing it. I'm in my late 60s. I'm going to keep doing it until I can't remember anymore. So Beth, if I can't remember your name, let me know, because I think that might be a good indicator. But if I can't remember my name, that's going to be a real problem. But my mom and I used to joke about this. She used to teach a class at the senior center in New York where I was growing up. And it was at the Golden Age Club, and it was a class on memory. And she said, I had to stop teaching the class because I couldn't find my notes. And I thought, oh, that's so funny. But right now, that's kind of where I am. When I can't figure out which notebook I'm working on or where the files are in my hard drive, then it'll be time to close my laptop. But right now, this feels like a really rewarding career. And I guess I want to say to any of the folks who are listening to your show that if you're interested in this area and you're possibly interested in pursuing this as a new career, let me know. Write to me, because I'd love to kind of give you some ideas and help and kind of pay it forward. Lots of people helped me when I was going through this, and I'd love to help other folks as well.
And there's a lot of us out there, those baby boomers, right? I mean, more and more every day. I'm going to throw something out if I can. I just wanted to mention that the state of Massachusetts, the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, who I have to answer to, right, who I get my license from, they have a mandated training now on LGBTQ. And for them to do that, and my whole entire staff had to go through this training. It was actually pretty good. I think Boston University was somewhat involved with this. And then we also had our own training through SAGE. And Jane, you know what SAGE stands for better than I do, because I won't remember.
Yes, it's Services and Advocacy for the LGBTQ elder population.
And they do a fabulous training as well. And we did a trainer training. And I know that we have a few residents here that are gay, and we've done training with their staff. We've done training with their residents, and it's been awesome.
That's great.
So it's not just sexual. It's sex for everyone, right? It's sex for everyone.
And in some communities, Beth, I've heard older adults say they didn't want their gay son to come with his lover because they were afraid that people would talk and that they would be ostracized as a resident. So it's really important that we get this kind of information out there as well.
Yeah,
and we're not seeing that. We're seeing people feeling totally comfortable. And I think it's because of all the upfront training that we've done.
That's fantastic. Dr. Jane, as we sign off, I want you to drop the name of your podcast. I was listening to an episode or two last week and really appreciate it. So drop that in and then we'll start to sign off.
Sure. It's Our Better Half. We call it Our Better Half. It's about sex in the second half of life. We call it Our Better Half. And you can find it on any of the music streaming services. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, we just got picked up for a new season. I'm so excited.
Fantastic. Congrats. Beth, thank you so much for joining us. These topics are probably not on every single long-term care podcast, and you opening up about being one of Dr. Jane's first clients and, having the vision 5 years ago to say, I don't know everything and I'm going to learn alongside my staff to make it better for our senior communities. Hats off to you, and thank you so much. And I look forward to hopefully meeting you in person and going to one of these workshops.
Thank you.
Talk to you both soon.